This is episode 599 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing, president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. I am very pleased to be joined for this week's episode by Johnny Johnson. He is the executive director of the New Mexico Trucking Association. And we're going to talk a lot about electric vehicles, some about infrastructure issues in New Mexico, and we're just going to have a good time here. So, Johnny, welcome to Tipping Point, New Mexico.
Well, Paul, thank you for having me today. I look forward to this.
Yeah, well, been a lot going on, and I was pleased to appear on your podcast a while back. Why don't you take an opportunity to plug your show and some of the issues that you work on and talk about there?
Well, I appreciate that, Paul. The New Mexico Trucking Association obviously is the legislative regulatory voice for the trucking industry in the state of New Mexico. And we have several different ways that we speak to our members through a podcast, a magazine, and an email blast on a weekly basis. And we bring up topics like today on the different issues that are going on in the state. And some of them are pretty relevant. Some of them impact you, the buying public, every day.
Yeah, and so your podcast is just called the New Mexico Trucking Association Podcast, and that's available nmtrucking.org. You can find that and go way back into, I don't know what it was, maybe October or something when we sat down and talked. So there was an episode that I was involved with there. But we're going to talk about some issues within the trucking industry in a little bit. But first, just talk about the industry in New Mexico. New Mexico, fifth biggest state by geographical landmass. We have one of, if not the very most important transportation corridors in the entire country that runs through the heart of New Mexico. I'm talking about I-40, which of course goes to the coast, picks up, you get a lot of people coming in with, shipping containers and stuff coming out of Asia, as well as items being shipped from the West Coast. I know Mesilla Valley Transport, that's a big player in the trucking industry headquartered here, but kind of run through briefly your industry as it pertains to New Mexico.
Well, Paul, one of the things that a lot of people don't understand is I-40, we'll get to it in just a minute, but I-10 is a very important corridor between two ports of at Long Beach and Houston. And there are containers and product that come into Houston, get on I-10, go out to Long Beach, and get back on another boat. So it is a link across the entire planet, I-10, and it runs right through New Mexico. And so that's always been a very important corridor. I-40 in itself is a corridor that is between the east and the west coast. And one of the things that makes it so important here in New Mexico is that we are right in the perfect geographic setup for hours of service. And what that means is a driver can come out of Long Beach on I-40 and he would be having to take his break in New Mexico. And so that makes us like an inland port. And there's a lot of opportunities, and there's several different organizations. One of them is Gallup. Gallup is trying to make an inland port just on the, I believe it's the west side of Gallup. And they are perfect on the hours of service. They're right at 10 and a half hours. And so they could definitely help the economy by bringing product into New Mexico and redistributing it toward the east, west, north, and south. And so there's a lot of opportunity here on I-40, I-10. And of course, I-25 itself is a corridor between Mexico and Canada. And so it is widely used for that. And you brought up Mesilla Valley, and Mesilla Valley is one of our members. And that is the largest privately owned trucking company in the state of New Mexico. And its owner, Royal Jones, is one probably the most innovative guys I've ever met. When you're going down the road and you see a truck and it's got these large skirts on the sides
Hmm.
and the folding skirts on the back and the big hubcaps on, that all came from Mesilla Valley.
Huh.
He actually was the driving force behind that. Now you see it every day.
Interesting. Well, so how many New Mexicans are involved in the industry? What is the economic impact? Do you have any of those data? Or, obviously, a lot of goods come into New Mexico on trucks. We obviously have a big rail component as well. Anything to kind of highlight just how important? I mean, if the truckers all stopped, and thank God they didn't, even during COVID-19, when so much of the world did stop, the economy would stop very quickly, and quite frankly, people would die due to starvation issues if we did not have people out driving these trucks. So it's a big part of modern civilization, what your industry does.
Well, it's I'm glad you brought that up. I think the number is right now is right around 60,000 drivers are employed in the state of New Mexico, and I have the facts for drivers or facts for New Mexico, which is put out by ATRI, which is a research group out of Washington D.C. And one of the things that a lot of people didn't appreciate during COVID is that my guys and my gals that drive these trucks cannot work from home. It's just not going to happen. And the people loading the trucks, the people working on the trucks, the people repairing the tires, etc., that entire industry, and even the dispatchers, I mean, because of the way that the terminals are set up. And I ran terminals for 25 years, and trust me, there is no terminal that had people working from home. So you're absolutely correct. That was one of the things that a lot of people take for granted and they get upset with when they get on the highway is the truck movement. But like you were saying about I-40, I mean, 8,000 trucks a day through pre-pass go through the Gallup Port every day. And so, I mean, I-40 is absolutely an important corridor. Um, One of the things that I've always said, and given the opportunity, when Eisenhower built the interstate system, he he said that this will be the veins of the economy, and that's very true. And so we obviously in the trucking industry are the blood that runs through the veins.
All right. Well, I think it's safe to say that your industry is very important, and I appreciate. And you did drive a truck at one point. Talk about just briefly your own personal history with your industry.
Well, the first truck I got up on was in 1966, and it was olive drab, and it
Right.
was a M52A2. So I've been in this trucking industry for quite a while. I've owned trucks. I've got probably well over 1 million accident-free miles myself. So, but I always tell everybody, God said, "Okay, you've killed your share of bugs. You can get off now." So
All right. So let's talk about electric trucks and electric vehicles in your industry. Obviously, anything relevant to the there's the whole automotive industry as well. But both the Biden administration and the state of California, to my knowledge, those are the two main players, but correct me if I'm wrong, they are actively pushing trucks to be electric. Can you talk about that and how that's going to impact your industry, especially since presumably if they're coming from the port, a lot of those trucks do ultimately wind up in New Mexico?
yeah, Paul, absolutely. I'll tell you one of the things that's very disturbing about the EV push, especially in my industry, is the number one thing is the range is not there. I mean, to my knowledge, I think 170 is about the most realistic range that they've come up with for a commercial motor vehicle. And there's a couple of them operating that I believe Goodwill here in Albuquerque bought two of them from Freightliner, and the Cascades, I think they call them. And those trucks can only be charged right now that I know of is behind Walmart on Carlisle. So our concerns with the EV push into the commercial motor vehicles is that if you step back and you look at today's world in the diesel, I can fill up a semi truck and drive 2,000 miles. There's absolutely no way in the blue moon that you're going to get 2,000 miles out of an EV. You're going to get 170, 200 at the very best. And then you got to set for hours and get it charged. And the other thing is the most important thing that people need to realize, and we'll talk about that on the infrastructure, but these batteries are 8,000 pounds in these trucks. And so that's going to reduce the amount of cargo that they can haul. Now you've already reduced the mileage that they can run, and now you've reduced the amount that they can carry. So none of this is practical.
So, how about expense, and what is the actual push? What does it look like in terms of how strict these requirements are going to be?
Well, let's talk about the costs for a minute. A tractor today, a decent 18-wheeler tandem axle, is about $180,000. With an EV, you're looking at $550,000. And so when you've got, I mean, and if you look at the trucking industry as a whole, there's 80% of the trucking industry is independent contractors. And these are 1 to 5 truck, 10 truck guys. And so when you look at that number and they're dealing with a 3% margin, it's not practical. You're going to put people off the highway because they can't afford that. And even if they can afford it and they do get financing and they are able to make the truck get on the road, number one, they're not going to be able to make the kind of money that they were making with a long haul truck as it is today. So that's going to have like a double impact. And when you take and you start messing with the supply chain, as everybody knows during COVID, and I think they need to step back and remember those days, you start reducing the amount of cargo and the times that they can run, you are going to definitely affect inflation. And it's going to hit everybody. And I don't care, unless you've got a boat dock and a railhead behind your building in your house, it came on a truck. So it's going to affect everybody.
Right, and these mandates are going to be very hard for the industry to deal with, and they're going to drive up the costs of every single thing that we purchase. So, any other information relating to electrification or EV mandates and the trucking industry itself?
Well, the very fact that the way that they're mandating it, they're pushing it through the manufacturers, and I think that's totally unfair to them because what you're going to have them trying to do is to put 10 or 15 of these non-sellable vehicles on their lots, and nobody wants them because they understand that the cost restrictions and the charging and et cetera. But I think that's totally unfair. But the other part that they have to understand is that when this truck is empty, which they are sometimes going from point to point, now you've added 8,000 pounds. So this truck now is carrying more weight. And again, we're onto the infrastructure.
All right. Well, speaking of weight and road quality, etc., on one hand, for example, the state of New Mexico has more money than it's ever had. On the other hand, construction prices have gone up across the board, and there have been news reports, including most notably from KRQE Channel 13, about just issues with the I-40 corridor. And if you've driven, especially they say between Albuquerque and the Arizona border, but I think it's safe to say that and many other roads which carry trucks are in a state of disrepair. What are the kind of issues that are happening? And of course, I'll say it, at the outset, your industry gets blamed for a lot of issues with the roads and the potholes and whatnot. But you also pay a lot into those transportation funds, and that problem, of course, by the way, is going to only get worse when you're doubling and tripling and quadrupling the weight of the trucks with these batteries that they're going to have to hold onto them. But just talk about infrastructure, and especially maintaining that here in New Mexico.
Well, one of the things that my industry and the the associated contractors that are the road builders, we have a really good relationship. And so the guys that are out there trying to repair these highways are pretty much hamstrung by the state of New Mexico and the way that they do the bidding process, which that's probably a podcast within itself. And you could bring Jim Garcia or one of those guys in here and let them expand on that. But one of the other things is that we have weather in the state of New Mexico. And I mean, this isn't sunny California and it's not, rainy Florida, but with the hot and the cold that we endure here, it's very hard on the asphalt, number one. And number two, the weight of the vehicles, again, is an issue. But the amount that gets done on a highway, and then you have someone that passes a law that says the trucks all have to stay over in the right-hand lane unless they're passing. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to know that lane's going to deteriorate at a much faster pace. And so with that being said, and the other issue is I just drove over last week to Arizona and was on I-40 both ways. And I can tell you that you're dodging potholes all the way. And if you're in a pickup truck and you hit one of those potholes, you will flatten your tires. I guarantee it. And so the road is not only being not repaired, it's not even being patched. And that's the part that I think a lot of people are totally frustrated with because I hear it literally every day. But the 18 wheelers, when they blow a tire, you're talking $2,000. I mean, when that rim and that tire go down, and plus a service truck to come out. So I mean, the infrastructure on I-40 is sad, and then you drive into Arizona and you wonder, wait a minute. And I didn't go all the way up to 17. I cut across through Snowflake and stuff, but those roads were in pretty good repair. So you wonder what the difference is between New Mexico and Arizona for that point.
What do you you're in the industry? What do you think is going on there?
Well, I think it's the allocation, and I think it's the way that, in other words, in the pecking order of what the state thinks is important, and I've known guys in the NMDOT, and I've got a lot of respect for that group of people. They have a very hard job, and they're trying to. It's like what's that saying that I'm trying to dig a cave with a pickaxe. And that's pretty much what those guys are trying to do. In other words, if they would stop hamstringing the money and let the bids go out the way they should. Now, it's going to drive everybody crazy right now. I'll tell you right now, is that if you put that massive amount of construction on I-40, you're gonna drive people insane because
Right.
the entire I-40 corridor, other than the strips where several of them have already been done, is going to be nuts. But that should have been thought of 10 years ago, not today. In other words, it should have been progressively done at a reasonable pace at a reasonable time during the summer.
Yeah, there's talk of even expanding I-40 to have a third lane kind of
Yeah.
across the board. And obviously, any road construction involves slower traffic and orange barrels and the like, and nobody likes to see that stuff. But on the other hand, a third lane added to I-40, I think, would be great for everybody, including as long as it was tied to improved maintenance of the existing road and obviously continued maintenance. But again, we've got the money. Do you think this is something new so far? You've been in the industry for a long time. Lujan Grisham, not exactly a friend to business industry or any sane New Mexican. Uh, Martinez didn't have the money that we have now. Bill Richardson, of course, kind of a pro-business Democrat. Is this new to this administration, or do you think every governor has kind of had this lack of prioritization for these kind of important corridors?
I can tell you, Paul, I really believe that this has been a an issue that has been bubbling to the surface and has been ignored to the point. It's just like if you ignored the repairs on your house for 10 years, what would it look like? And so it's the same type of concept of what's going on I-40 and even I-10 and I-25. But I-40 is probably, because of the traffic that's on I-40, it's probably the most prevalent as far as being in the poor condition it is. But I can tell you right now, if you drive through the canyon, and don't get me started on the rumble strips, I think they're going to fix that. But I heard they had a meeting last night out in the canyon, so I think they're going to fix the rumble strips. But there's a section out there that was done by Mountain States contractors, and you drive into the canyon, and your pickup will vibrate all the way until you hit that stretch. And then you go through that stretch and you think that you're on a different planet. It's just perfectly smooth.
Right.
And so, I mean, we have some fabulous contractors in this state that can do a premier job if they could just get their hands on the timing and the funding. And the other part, and I've heard this from many of my contractor friends, is that they're having a hard time finding guys to work.
Yeah, I've heard that as well, and I'm sure we could go into a lot of details on
Oh, yeah.
issues with that. How is that issue in the trucking industry? And this is going to be kind of a transition in the conversation, but trucking. On one hand, you have a lot of media reports talking about driverless trucks and how in 5 or 10 years, all of it's going to be automated in some way, shape, or form. So, I mean, that's got to hurt you a little bit with recruitment of truckers. On the flip side, and I'm interested in your thoughts on this, you drive along I-40 as I tend to do more than any other road. You see a lot of Indian subcontinent, Asian Sikhs, and people from a different ethnic background than you, I think, traditionally thought. Smokey and the Bandit going back a few years. You see a lot of immigrants involved in the trucking industry, and I'd love to hear how that kind of has changed in the recent several years.
I'll tell you, Paul, you hit something right there. And let me jump over to an issue that I think everybody needs to know about. When I was at the pre-pass board meeting this past week, Texas brought up an issue that they discovered, and I'm sure it's happening in New Mexico, Arizona, and California, is that there's false Mexican CDL license out there, and they're in abundance. And here's what happened: a state trooper in Texas pulled a guy over, and the way that their system works with New Mexico, with our agreement with New Mexico and the United States and FMCSA, is that they can reach over and test and see if the license is valid. Well, he looked and the license is valid, but the guy didn't speak Mexican or Spanish. And
Right.
so that was his first clue that something was wrong. And long story short, the guy was Iranian.
Oh,
And he had a false Mexican CDL driver's license. And the reason that he pulled him over is that he couldn't maintain his lanes and he was going too slow on the interstate. And the reason he was going too slow is because he couldn't shift the truck.
ah,
Yeah, we find that very amazing. But that type of issue is going on at a rampant pace. And so we have people out there in the industry that are driving trucks that are not qualified, and that's number one. And number two is that uh, when you can come over here and get a license in 4 weeks, uh, and get on a truck and drive away, is frightening to all of us that's been in this industry a long time. And so those kind of issues are going to become a problem every day. In other words, in accidents and cargo and failures. But as far as the employment, let me tell you something. You ask why they're here. You can make $100,000 a year driving a truck.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, you don't need a college degree, and you don't have to have the president uh, pay off your student loan. You can get a great paying job. And the way that a lot of the companies that already understand this process is they use what they call the stagecoach or the Pony Express concept. In other words, you go out and drop your trailer and come back with an empty. And so the Pony Express concept keeps a lot of people at home a lot more than they used to.
Okay.
The independent contractors that run East Coast or West Coast, they own their own trucks. They go through brokers and they're hauling lettuce one day and TVs the next. So that's a different type of trucking that's out there, and 80% of what's out there is the independent trucker.
Yeah, well, that's fascinating, and obviously, there's a lot of opportunities still in your industry. I know from my experience with friends and family members, et cetera, that historically trucking could involve a lot of time away from the family, and that's one of the drawbacks to it. But I'm sure those new innovative models and different approaches can be helpful. So let's talk about the future of trucking, and especially the thing that people keep talking about. But I think in terms of the self-driving car as well as the self-driving truck, I mean, if you don't trust a self-driving car, and we've already had issues with Teslas and other vehicles that have been involved in crashes, uh, I think the technology has a lot of promise to it, but the idea of a self-driving semi-truck going down the road is pretty hard to wrap their heads around for a lot of people. If in terms of they're driving alongside of it and see that kind of thing in operation, and one lawsuit is going to be is going to be rough. So, talk about the industry and adjusting to this and other technologies, but especially the self-driving issue and how you see that playing out.
Well, I've been fortunate to be privy, and I've taken a tour of some of this manufacturing plants where they're doing the autonomous trucks, and they're very impressive. And I have an opinion on where this is going and where I think it should be, and I don't think that you're going to see autonomous trucks trying to back up to a dock or to drive in downtown Santa Fe and deliver groceries to one of the restaurants.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's in the cards because of all the difficulties of trying to make that happen, and putting trucks into a pedestrian area would be insane. Um, but one of the things that I do think that you may see in the autonomous trucking is point to point. In other words, on the outskirts of Long Beach, I'll just pick on Long Beach, and the truck gets its load and it drives straight to, let's say, Gallup, and on the outskirts of Gallup, a driver takes over and brings it into the to the facility, and then exchanges it and puts another autonomous truck back in its position going back to Long Beach. I think that you may see that someday in the future, but as far as autonomous trucks taking over driving jobs at a large and disturbing pace, I don't see that. Because, like right now, if you'll check with any of the autonomous manufacturers, their testing still requires a driver sitting behind the wheel as this all this testing's going on, because there's so many variables that trucking and automobiles don't share. In other words, when a truck breaks down, it's huge. So it can't just stop in the lane. It has to pull over, number one. And number two, it has to put some type of warning device out behind it in order to keep somebody from running into it. So I don't think that they've quite figured out who's going to get out and put the cones out when the trucks broke down. So
Right.
they've got a long ways to go with this. And the other thing, too, is the motoring public. And I can assure you of the thousands of people that have talked to me about this, is that they want no part of driving down a highway beside an 80,000-pound truck that does not have a driver in it. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a safety issue. It's frightening. And I'm not saying the technology can't do it. I believe it can do it to a degree, but I think it's that infinite. Where is the point where we stop, and where is the point where we start? That they haven't come to grips with in that industry.
Yeah, and it seems like that is something that's going to be, just kind of like flying on an airplane. I mean, you get into the airplane, and obviously there's been a lot of issues right now, and airline safety and DEI is involved in that whole debate and discussion. But the idea that you're going to hop on board an airplane with no pilot whatsoever, a drone essentially, I think that would be unnerving to vast majority of people.
Well, I can see them all getting on, and I can see them all getting right back off.
Exactly. Yeah. So okay. I've got to imagine that fuel prices, just as a aside from the not even talking about electric vehicles, but obviously fuel prices are elevated. Is that just as simple as a pass through, or does that change things for your industry? Does that shift maybe more freight over to rail? Rails had their own problems with safety in recent months and years. So, but right now, fuel prices are elevated. Is that a significant issue, or you just pass that along and that's it?
Well, it is an issue. Again, I go back to the independent truckers out there. I mean, these guys are on a very narrow margin of profit, and they've been hamstrung by ELDs. And if you don't know what that is, that's electronic logging device.
That's a big regulation that the federal government imposed several years ago.
Yeah, and it's a terrible one, and that's, to me, it's a safety issue, and I think any trucker worth his salt will tell you that ELD is the worst thing that they ever came up with. Now I understand why they did it, because back when we created the trucking industry in the 1930s, and then somewhere down the line we started paying every trucker by the mile, and so we created our own growing concerns. In other words, if I can make X number of dollars running 500 miles, well, I'll just run 600. And so they started stretching the paper and started driving fatigued, and so fatigue became an issue. But ELDs, and I think every trucker worth his salt will concur with me, ELDs did not solve that problem. It actually created another problem. And what that is that where I could stretch the paper and stop and see Sally at the truck stop and take a break for an hour and a half, and be able to stretch the paper and not show that too much. Now I can't stop. In other words, I've got this electronic device in my truck that is monitoring my hours of service and the fact that I'm moving. So it takes that ability to what I call a power nap. And truckers everywhere will tell you that the way that they survive this industry is by power naps. In other words, when they pull over into a rest area and they close their eyes for 15, 20 minutes, that is a safety thing to me. And so they've taken that ability away, and they'll say, well, we've got it put in there to where every 8 hours you got to stop for 30 minutes. Well, every every guy out there that's loading a truck or unloading a truck or stopping for fuel, that's where that 30 minutes is going to get used, and he'll log it and keep on trucking. So
So I'll just ask a dumb question. You know, would
there are no dumb
with
questions.
electric vehicles, you know, you got to charge them for a longer time
Uh-huh.
period. Can't you just line up your brakes with the charging of the electric vehicle, you know, the battery for the truck and work all that into the process, or is that somehow not possible?
No, it's not. And let me tell you, if you go out there and if you take a 10, 11 hour day and you can run 600 miles, and you take a truck that can only go 200 miles, and I'm being generous, it goes 200 miles, and if you could find a charging station, you get on it. You got to sit there for hour and a half, 2 hours, and that's just an estimate on my part. I have no knowledge of how long it's going to take to charge an 8,000 pound battery. It could take 4 hours. I know the semis that I told you about that were sold here in town. The dealership took them down and they charged them to capacity in 2.5 hours. But that's brand new in town under ideal conditions. So let's just say that you go out 200 miles and you sit there for 2.5 hours, then you got to go another 200 miles, then you got to charge it again. Well, all you've accomplished in that entire day of work is 400 miles. So if you take 8,000 trucks and I'll just use arbitrary numbers, and you lose 200 miles a day of productivity, you don't have to figure out that this industry is going to implode on that type uh, of functioning or lack of functioning.
Fair. I just wanted to make sure to get that point out. So
Did they get it out?
I didn't actually mean it was a dumb question, but I thought it would be too easy. It would be too perfect, and of course, these things never work out quite that way because the federal government and the state of California engage in their mandates in an arbitrary fashion with literally no interest in the reality on the ground of your industry or human existence. They are government bureaucrats and they do things for their own reasons, whatever they may be. So,
Yeah, I would like to know what those reasons are.
well, we are just about out of time here, Johnny. So, any last things you'd like to highlight about the New Mexico trucking industry or any issues that we didn't
Well,
cover?
can I plug my event?
Absolutely.
Okay. We've got an event coming up on May 16th at Sandia. That's our annual golf tournament. But on May 17th, we have a business meeting out at Isleta. But the most important part is on May 18th, we have the truck driving championships. And, and that's where truck drivers that have a clear and safe record for the past year can come out and compete in 9 different classes to represent New Mexico at the national level. And it's a great day in the sun. And if you've got questions about this industry, or if you want to know more about how to get in the industry as a dock worker, as a dispatcher, as a truck driver, um, that would be a great day to come out. You can find me. I'll be out there all day, and we have a great venue that day. And there's a skills course and a written test and a pre-trip test. And the state police are out there. They're doing their challenge, and one of their officers will go also and represent New Mexico. And so it's a great day with the trucking industry, the New Mexico State Police, and if you get the opportunity, come out and see us at Isleta Resort and Casino.
All right. Sounds interesting. Thank you very much for your time, Johnny. I appreciate our friendship and the work that you and your industry do to make life better for all New Mexicans. You do more in in an hour than most politicians do in a lifetime. Most of them actually make life worse for us than, and you guys are constantly making it better. So thanks for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointsnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to this show at Apple, Stitcher, or tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.